Hello AP World History students. So here we are. This is the second to last lesson of the year of fully new material. And in this lesson we are going to complete the story of China. And what a story it was. And as we're all sitting at home due to the coronavirus, it suddenly feels very close and relevant to us, since that virus sort of originated in China and was covered up originally by the Chinese government. Here we go. Let's understand this in a more complex and nuanced way. All right, so the idea of this lesson, lesson 7.11, is communist China, really with a focus on since World War II, from World War II to today. So let's begin, and you have to start this story of communist China with Mao. He is the central figure in the story of the Chinese Communist Party. He's the one who, we didn't get into this in our class, and that's really fine given the situation that our class is in right now, but he's able to rise to power starting in the 1920s as a leader of the Chinese Communist Party. There's this long internal struggle in China, kind of a civil war between the Chinese communists and the Chinese nationalists. Along the way, Japan invades and World War II happens and everyone's hair is on fire and it's craziness. And at the tail end of this, 1949, so just a couple years after World War II is over, Mao and the communists are able to sort of firmly take control of China. And he's going to remain in firm control of China from that point, 1949, until his death in 1976. And he is a true, I was going to say true blue, but we should say a true red believer in communism. I don't know if anyone has ever drank as deeply the dregs of communism into their very soul as Mao did. Like, communism is the solution to any problem that you could conceive of, according to him. And in general, we'll see that his programs are badly destructive, right? Maybe like Stalin, there's some progress is made, some gains occur, but always at a really frightening cost. And so, when you think Mao, think big, all right? Big appetite, big waistline, big vision for China, big plans. It's all got to happen right now, all right? And sort of preposterous levels of economic engineering, social engineering, cultural engineering. I mean, just imagine someone taking a culture with as much continuity and tradition as China and saying, well, let's sort of uproot and pull all this stuff out and rebuild it from the ground up. And it's like, dude, do you have any idea how crazy that is, right? Or how destructive that will be? The first thing that happens, and this, like we've said, happens at the end of many civil wars in world history, is the old guard is eliminated. You see the word counter-revolutionaries a lot in communist histories, and that basically just means anyone who's opposed to communist revolution, right? And typically it means kind of the bourgeois class, it means the landowning class, it means anyone that has anyone to lose or who speaks up and is like, I don't think communism works. It's like, silence you, and they put you up against the wall and you get shot, right? That's what counter-revolutionaries means. And that process begins right away. So the initial victims of Mao's rule are political opponents and remnants of the old nationalist party that he had fought with for power in China. And so what counter-revolutionaries means, I have a list here, like professors and managers, landowners, journalists, teachers, artists, foreigners, the old-fashioned, anyone who's like, yeah, but the old ways have something to them, or I'm not sure this is going to work, or I think maybe we should go slower, right? That can get you labeled as a counter-revolutionary and put a big target on your back. Communist China and Communist Russia they're ostensibly allies, but they are not close. They do not see eye to eye, and they each sort of disagree over who the true inheritors of Marxist communism is. But Mao's first move is like a move directly out of the Joseph Stalin playbook, right? It's a 5-year plan where we are going to industrialize, and we're going to begin the process of collectivizing our farming. And with regard to the industrialization, similar to Stalin, you can point to some progress being made, but usually really inefficiently and at a heavy human cost, right? And so it's not like China didn't make any industrial progress or didn't develop any kind of industrialized military capacity. Yeah, sure, they had some, all right? Certainly what was not getting produced at all was any type of like consumer goods or products that were really designed to help anyone other than the government, right? Like they're industrializing with the aim of helping the government, not helping individual consumers, certainly. And when progress on this 5-year plan in the early 1950s is slow and halting and it's just not really happening according to like the spreadsheets. You know, Mao just demands, I want this to happen now, and all kinds of people say, yes sir, immediately sir, and then it's sort of not really happening. Mao announces, okay, here's the problem. We were trying, like, this wasn't grandiose and big enough, and so he's going to up the stakes for the first time, right? Rather than follow Stalin's playbook, we're going to go beyond, we're going to throw out Stalin's playbook and go beyond it, and he calls for this great leap forward, right? Where we are going to fully collectivize all agriculture in China. Now bear in mind, China is an enormous place, right? With a not insignificant agricultural history. Chinese people know how to farm, right? It's preposterous to say like, hey, we have some things to teach the Chinese about farming. It's like, no, I think they're pretty good at that, right? History tells us they've learned a few lessons along the way. But he's like, no, we're going to sort of like, we're going to uproot everything old and teach people a whole new paradigm for farming. And along the way, we're also going to industrialize and mobilize the full might of the Chinese population. So this great leap forward. Even the name is big, right? It's not like the modest plan for incremental improvements. It's like, no, we're going to do a great leap forward. So in the great leap forward, all private land ownership is abolished. It is over, all right? In the great leap forward, because you no longer own private farms, all people are moved onto collectives or communes, right? Think of it like you and your family are moved onto like a, almost like the YMCA Camp Chaminade. Like everyone's sort of moved onto these camps and you and your family sleep in barracks and you eat in a big commons, all right? And then in the morning, the children might sort of receive some instruction from some other people, but mom and dad and any child old enough goes off to work in the collective farms, and we all work. And really, you don't even have a family anymore. You're just all sort of collectivized together, all right? And you are surrounded day and night with happy time propaganda. You see this guy holding up a red book. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But like, there's this sort of like, everything will be shared, right? And everything that is produced in the collective farms will go to the government, and then the government will sort of like piecemeal sort of hand out the food back to those of you who've done sufficient and good work. And this is what life will be. What this results in is a catastrophic collapse of agriculture in China. Again, this is like a government-created famine, right? China has famines before out of natural disasters, but in general, China is a bountiful place that can produce a whole heck of a lot of food, as we've learned in history. Not this way, right? Because again, it annihilates any individual incentive to work, right? And it's just like you will work out of fear and out of interest in your role in the collective good, all right? But it basically turns everybody into, I mean, not to use too hyperbolic language, but kind of slaves for the state. You will work in order to receive your food. And you can even see here, like this notion of this farm, like what they needed was tractors. What they needed was mechanization. In the 1950s, tractors existed, right? In industrialized parts of the world. China was very far behind and they didn't have it. So I was just like, our plan is, instead of tractors, I'll take 600,000 people and give them, you know, hoes and shovels, and we'll just put them to work that way. But it's like, that is just an inefficient way of producing. In the famine that results, and when you also couple in all the executions of people who are pushing back or who say, I don't want to give over my land for this, or who resist all that collectivization process, our best estimates are between some 30 and 40 million Chinese died. Now, as more time passes between then and now, more records become available. That number has moved up, and it keeps floating up and up. Now, Mao does not ever acknowledge that this didn't work, right? It would have worked, all right? It would have worked except for the counter-revolutionaries and also the Sparrows. The Sparrows, you see, these sparrows came and they ate all the agricultural yield, right? And so like they ate everything, and that's why this happened. And haven't you all noticed? Haven't we all seen how there's more sparrows around these days, and that's what wrecked this, and that's why the Great Leap Forward didn't work? And everyone's sort of consigned to go, oh yeah, I did notice that. So then they have this whole initiative where it's like, boys, go out and kill as many sparrows as you can. Everybody kill the sparrows so that the Great Leap Forward will work. And you see this propaganda image of this boy collecting sparrows, and then almost like a comedy movie, right? It would be a comedy if it weren't so evil and destructive and deadly. When the sparrows are gone, then the locusts move in. And there's nothing to kill the locusts anymore. So now the next year, the locusts wipe out the harvests, and the Chinese government's like, we could use some sparrows. So then they actually start importing sparrows from the Soviet Union because they'd killed too many in the previous years. And everyone's like, yes, bring back more sparrows. And like it says here, this is from a great article I read, it's like, in Mao's China, you are condemned to perpetual enthusiasm, right? The state will mouth the party line of, here's what's going on, but it's not Mao's fault, and this is what we're all going to do. And everyone's like, yay, this is what we're all going to do, right? And if you're the quiet person saying, is this right? It's just like, silence, fool, right? Shut up, you. And then we're all doing this. And you sort of have to keep marching in collective formation, right? It's an upside down world. A few years after the Great Leap Forward has officially been put to rest, Mao kind of triples down on this whole idea, right? And his narrative is, besides the sparrows, the other problem with the Great Leap Forward was there were too many people who were trapped in old ways of thinking, right? There were too many people trapped in notions of private property or individual initiative, perhaps, or just even like too many people who weren't fully on board with this vision of a communist China. And so, and he blamed all kinds of stuff. Like there's too many teachers teaching old-fashioned stuff, all this sort of Confucian nonsense. Maybe in some places it's fine, but really by and large, it's damaging, and it's like pulling on the wrong end of the rope. And so it's time to, as best we can, just sort of like take the slate, imagine like a whiteboard of like Chinese culture that's like filled to the brim with like millennia of Chinese history, and just start like erasing it, right? So we can like put in place a new culture that is more receptive to this communist vision of life. And so this cultural revolution is the new aim, and this is launched in the mid to late 1960s, not long ago, guys, 50 years ago. All right, this is launched. And it's like the idea is we have to destroy the old, destroy traditional ways of thinking. Confucianism is going to be gone after. We're going to go after patriarchy, right? Because we need to empower women and activate women into this new kind of collective economy. Old-time religion, anything that kind of takes our eye off the ball of collective effort, right? Like that is what we have to lean into. And as a way to sell this, the people he kind of sells this to are the young people, right? The young people are the ones who really buy into Mao. The old people are the ones who are like, yeah, I don't know. Or like, I've seen a lot of life and I'm really not sure this is going to work. It's the students who just love this, as strange as that might sound to you, but it's the students who buy in. The students are what are called the Red Guard, right? Activists who are sort of like, they're told, you must be our eyes and our ears. You must be the ones who listen to what are parents saying? What are your relatives saying? What are your teachers saying? Are any of them embracing the olds, right? The old ideas that are counter to our new vision and our new way of life? Like, your future depends on us all working together, right? And that means the elimination or the marginalizing or the silencing of all the people who are embracing the old. And Mao issues, at school I have this copy of it, I don't have it now, but Mao issues his so-called Little Red Book, right? It's like it's our little Chinese Communist Bible, right? It's full of the wisdom of Mao. Every person, every Chinese citizen must own this, and they must keep it on them at all times, and they must read it, right? It's like your daily devotion that you get down, and I want you all to open up your little red books and underline a little verse or proverb that's meaningful to you and write down in your journal, what you think it means and how it applies to your life. And it sounds upside down and crazy, guys, but that is it. Students, do you see connections with this today? Do you see places in our own contemporary society where young people say, it's time for the old people to get out of the way, right? Because like the new ideas have come. And I might just challenge you as a history teacher to say, are these really new ideas? Are there new ideas, right? Or are they just kind of old ideas repackaged? Is there wisdom in the old, or is this something that must be burned down? You know, so many teachers get sort of turned in by the Red Guard that schools have to close down. Now, you know something about this. But it's like, unlike us where we can do e-learning, schools just shut down a couple years into the Cultural Revolution. So they just shut down, and teachers get sent away for re-education. And what that means is like they take people like me with all you and your fancy books with all this book knowledge and blah, blah, blah. Let's teach Mr. Welly a lesson about how the world really works, and we're going to send him off into the countryside and give him a shovel and make him do hard labor for a while. And that will be his re-education. We'll send him to a re-education camp. And so the schools just shut down. And many, many of them didn't open for 8, 9, 10 years. And what that means is you have a whole generation of people in China who their education stops at grade 5, 6, 7, 8, wherever they were. It's just like, well, you're done, all right? And it creates a weird lost generation. The full consequences of the Cultural Revolution and everything that happened with it, along with it, are unclear. I'll say, basically, by the time Mao is losing some vitality in the mid-late 1970s, other people in the Communist Party are kind of like, yeah, so here's the deal, man. This thing is crazy. All kinds of other people in the Communist Party quietly are acknowledging that the Great Leap Forward was a disaster and the Cultural Revolution was like an even bigger disaster, right? But they're not going to directly go after him. They're just kind of biding their time waiting for him to die. And once he does die, then it's sort of like, okay, let's sort of like readjust this whole program of Chinese communism. But in the end, you know, Mao's record is between some 40 to 70 million people dead, Chinese people dead, under his rule. That's an all-time record, right? It's not a record you want, all right? And people today tend to not remember this as well, right? I mean, most of the victims were Chinese peasants or Chinese landowners, and that tends to be kind of an abstraction for many people today. Or they remember like the Holocaust more because the Holocaust has the element of like racism woven into it that makes it such a hook for Western thinkers. And this doesn't as much, but this is it's more deadly, and it's crazy. After Mao is gone, the new leader of the Chinese Communist Party is a man named Deng Xiaoping, and Deng he's still a communist, right? He's still a leader of the Communist Party, but he is not a economic hardliner, all right? In fact, he begins reforms that move China toward, that open up free market elements into China's economy, right? That allow for some private ownership, that allow for private competition, that allow for foreign companies to move in and open up factories in China. China is still, however, where China does bear a lot of resemblance to communism, and China is still a one-party system, right? With totalitarian kind of political control. And the Chinese Communist Party has refused to offer any social and political freedoms to its people, or at least to offer many social and political freedoms to its people. You don't get to vote for opposition parties. There is no freedom of speech. Everything is heavily censored on the internet and everything else, right? So the Chinese Communist Party has said, we are going to allow liberal economic reforms, more market elements, all right, to raise the economic tide, and that has been successful, as we know. It's sort of like, imagine two doors. There's a room with two doors, and the people in China are told in the 1980s, hey, one door is marked economic freedoms. You can go through that door at your peace, or in peace, and pursue whatever you want and become upwardly mobile and bourgeois and aspirational and chase after it. Guys, let's see some Chinese millionaires and billionaires and factory owners. We're going to do it. All right. The other door is labeled political freedoms, and that involves like free elections and opposition parties. I would advise you not to knock on that door and not to even approach that door. In 1989, under the leadership of Deng, the students in China, figuratively speaking, went up and knocked on that door and then started banging on that door at in these protests at Tiananmen Square. I'm going to assign you a short video that's going to talk about that. And it's safe to say that the Chinese government responded by saying, "Get away from that door," and when people didn't, they opened fire. All right, this became the Tiananmen Square massacre, where young people in China who were asking for democratic-style political reforms this was shut down. And of course, the most famous and enduring image, maybe the whole 20th century, that comes out of that is the Tank Man image. And I think something that's worth noting about this image is this actually happens after the massacre. All right, this is the day after the massacre, and these Chinese tanks are kind of parading around the city, and this one man, and we don't know who he was, right? One man sort of steps out into the street and stands in the way of them and becomes this ultimate symbol of individualism. Right? That's what I love about this image. This is like the ultimate image of individualism, and it comes out of China, no less. But it's also safe to say that while maybe many Americans like me hold Tank Man near and dear to their hearts, the tanks won. Right? The tanks won. The Communist Party remains in power in China today. And, the Communist Party, to some extent, sort of tried to buy off the public. They just like, look, here, we're going to give you stuff. Right? We're going to give you economic freedoms, and the thing is, you just can't ask. We're not going to allow you to ask for different governance. And so you have the sort of like censored police state on one hand, and you have this rising urban bourgeois middle class, aspirational middle class on the other hand. And economically, China is a rising story. All right, it's a story of rising income, of economic influence in the world rising, of course, and poverty is falling. That's a good thing. But it's also complicated, as we see in our world here in the last 5-6 months. It's a complicated story. And that's our deep hope. May we be ones who fathom the world's complexity. China is a really central part of this. And AP students, I hope that you enjoyed learning China's story in our course. I love teaching this. This is something that not everyone in our school really gets to wrap their arms around. We must be the young Christians in our community who understand China's story, the ups and downs, the ins and outs, and we can speak into that in a truth-filled and God-honoring way. All right, I look forward to our next lesson, to finishing off next time. So until then, take care, guys.